What if somebody made a proper movie and nobody noticed? Let's talk about Juror number 2.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. So today, we will be discussing or debating Juror number 2. But before we get into that, we are going to do what we always do each week and provide you movie recommendations. So guys, what's the best recent thing that you have seen?
So I finally got around to watching Transformers 1. It would have been great to do a review on it, but we seem to have got a delayed release for it in the UK compared to the US. So by the time it kind of came about, the discussion had moved on from it. But it's an animated movie about kind of like the origins of Optimus Prime and Megatron and the planet that they came from, sort of their friendship that they had before they became sort of these mortal enemies and sort of on two separate sides of a war. And nothing sort of super complex about it. It's just a nice kind of fun journey with some like really cool characters, and you know really get invested in this relationship between the two of them, knowing what's to come at the end of it. So the whole time you're going on this journey with them, you're just waiting to sort of see and understand the moment where the divide between the two sort of comes. And with that, it's just like really well done, really solid story in this, and just a fun ride with cool Transformer action in there as well.
My best recent thing, I was going to say Apocalypse Z is a new zombie apocalypse movie. I think it was based in Spain. That was good. However, I want to give a special shout out to season 2 of Special Ops Lioness. I watched that too, and I think that's gonna be my shout out. This is a good one. I've seen season 1. Obviously, thank God the season 2 now, 3 episodes out so far. I think it's probably 4. It's featuring Zoe Saldana, and her story pretty much is a mother, and she also works. I believe she works in the CIA, or she's pretty much a part of a special program that pretty much they kill terrorists pretty much. It's a good watch. So I definitely recommend you guys to go check it out.
I think the thing that you're missing in there is that part of their special op lionesses is that they have to have someone infiltrate the sort of kind of like terrorist organization, or kind of like befriend someone that's close to the target that they want to kill, essentially. And the whole like draw of it is that this person has to find an opportunity to kill the terrorist, and once they kill the terrorist, it's then they have to then be extracted, essentially. So it's just the threat and the risk level that's associated with that type of operation, essentially. And I didn't even know season 2 was out, because season 1 was like a fun ride. So definitely going to be checking out season 2.
No, I'll definitely say you're probably gonna receive like a lot of emotional engagement in terms of like trying to see her balance out her profession and her family, and just kind of like the two. It's like it doesn't really. It's hard for them to coexist, and there's sometimes where you're thinking, damn, like is her profession gonna end up affecting her family in terms of her family gonna be in danger? Because even season 1, it kind of is like it's going in a way, it's implying that, and I see it going in that direction. So it's becoming interesting.
My best thing I watched last week was The Death of Stalin, which is a 2017 satire comedy movie, which is set in the Soviet Union in 1953. And Stalin dies at the beginning of the movie, and the movie is essentially about his inner circle trying to manage the transition of power in the Soviet Union, while at the same time kind of dealing with this culture of paranoia and suspicion, and how it's just dangerous to say the wrong thing at the wrong time that Stalin created. And it's full of really good actors that play these various historical characters who it's kind of this almost slapstick comedy of errors, where they, first of all, they try to save Stalin and fail because all the good doctors have been sent to the gulag, and so there's only the bad doctors left. And there's like this 20-year-old medical student who's the only one left, and he keeps insisting that he's old because everybody rejects his opinions because he's so young, and it's just that kind of absurd comedy. And they have to organize the funeral, and then they have to organize the transition of power without a power struggle. And it's just one absurd situation after the next, and it's just a really well done comedy, really well done satire. And I watched this after a recommendation from actually a journalist who studies Russia and knows that history. And it seems to get the basic facts of what Stalinism and Stalin's Soviet Union was like, right? And then builds a comedy on top of that. So yeah, that was a good watch.
Looks like it's time for the main event. Daniel, may you please let the people know what the hell is Jurors 2?
So Juror number 2 is this courtroom thriller movie about somebody who gets called for jury duty somewhere in the southern United States, I believe in Georgia. So he initially doesn't want to go because his wife is pregnant and is about and they're about to have their child, and he wants to do anything but be locked in a jury room for however long it would take. And as the trial unfolds, it's essentially this murder trial, and he realizes that he's the killer, because he thinks a year earlier he hit a deer like late at night while driving home. And as he hears the facts of the case, he realizes that it was not a deer he hit. It was, in fact, this woman, and her boyfriend is now being charged with her murder. But in order to come forward with that, he would essentially ruin his own life, because his circumstances are such that if he came forward, he would be charged with the murder and he would go away for life. And then his wife and his son would grow up without him, and he would not have the life he has built. And so he is essentially faced with this decision of what the right thing to do is. So that's essentially the story of Juror number 2. So what did we think of the movie?
You know what? I think you should go last, because your face looks. How is it?
No, I think you think my take's going to be drastically different from you guys. I don't think it's going to be. I just,
go ahead. Go.
I will go first. It's fine. So I enjoyed the movie. I'll say that. I think it, posed a lot of sort of really like interesting sort of dilemmas and questions in terms of like morality and something what justice really looks like, and it speaks a lot about sort of kind of whether like people can change and things like that. So it touches on like a lot of like really interesting things in the movie. But my biggest gripe was that I just wasn't entertained enough throughout the movie. You mentioned about some of the courtroom drama that was sort of unfolding. There wasn't really a point where I was like super interested in what was going on in the courtroom, and for good reason, because it's meant to be a simple sort of slam track case. The prosecution's expected to sort of win it by landslide. It's meant to be sort of easy for the jury to come to a guilty decision in this. So that aspect of it, it's okay. I can kind of forgive it. Where I felt it was lacking the most was the jury deliberations that was going on. For it being a movie about a juror, essentially, I felt like that's where I was wanting a lot more, and I was like sort of kind of like hoping for more. But I don't know. I just kept like running into jarring characters throughout the process, which were like kind of like just really taking me out of the movie, essentially. So we'll of course get into more specifics in the sort of the spoiler section of this review, but I think overall it's a good movie with good ideas, but just doesn't have the entertainment factor that to sort of keep. It didn't have the entertainment factor that that had me engaged throughout the whole movie.
For me, I think I enjoyed this movie more because I felt like it had 12 Angry Men influences. If you haven't seen that movie, I would recommend you guys to go check it out. Really good movie. So the stuff that was going on in the jury, I actually really enjoyed. I do agree with Hervé's point in terms of like the characters, because what's mad? Actually, characters that I found annoying were the black characters. I found them so annoying, bro. I'll be honest with you. They fitted stereotypes so like I wasn't angry at the stereotypes. It's just that the way that they were acting was so impatient and irrational and just very like, you know what I'm saying, like reactive. I was like, bro, just chill, calm down. But clearly that was intentional by the director, so it is what it is. Well, besides that, I really enjoyed this movie. Firstly, what a way to snitch on yourself, but it was fun. It was a fun movie. I think I got my emotional engagement from the moral dilemma of things, especially like just the internal and seeing the internal conflicts within the character. His performance, by the way, like it was really good. It kind of reminded me of Cillian Murphy. Doesn't really say much, but his face says a lot. Like the way that he acts, his aura, just like the expressions that he does, it speaks a lot. And the character in this movie, like he wasn't really like he was saying like he wasn't like quiet, but he like there were times where he was like very vocal, but there were many moments where he was very silent, and that said a lot because you can just tell that like within like the truth was kind of like eating him alive. So I think yeah, I actually I enjoyed this movie. I was actually surprised why they didn't actually push out this film. Yeah, it was a surprise. I felt like this is definitely, I wouldn't go to the lengths to say it was a hidden gem, but I would say it's definitely a film that should have had more backing.
So I might be the most positive about this one. I think it's just a really solid movie. I think it's a really well constructed courtroom drama, while at the same time also doing a thing I like in movies, which is when they kind of have a question and different characters represent different answers to that question. So in this case, it is, can a person change? And should you give somebody a second chance if they say they've changed? So ultimately, that's what this movie is about. And different characters represent different versions of that question or different answers to that question. And that's just, I like it when a movie does that, and I think this movie does it well. On that basis, I enjoyed it a lot. I think the performances are great, especially Nicholas Holt, I think, does a really good job. Like Jonathan, like you said, he has to do it non-verbally most of the time because he's actually not allowed to speak in many cases. And I think the movie does a good job conveying his frame of mind and like what he's thinking in that situation. I don't think it's perfect. I think the main problem is that I think the case is much weaker than the movie wants you to believe. I think in order for the story to work, it has to be a slam dunk case, and this just isn't. I think if you see it that way, you just have to ignore that in order to make the movie happen. And I think if that had been better constructed, it would have been a stronger movie. But just on a character level and on a thematic level, I think this really works. And on that basis, I enjoyed it a lot.
So, okay, this question is for both of you, but mainly towards Hervey. Of course, Daniel, I'm interested to hear your opinion as well. But Hervey, don't you feel like the moral dilemma provided that kind of like engagement for you, like in terms of like emotionally, especially when it comes to the high stakes that came with it? Like the guy pretty much had to either give up his family. When it comes to the truth, he had to either give up his family for an ex-criminal. Didn't that do anything for you?
I mean, it definitely did, and sort of that's part of where I was getting the enjoyment out. Like again, I didn't hate the movie. I didn't sort of come away from it sort of disliking the movie at all. And of course, sort of this moral dilemma of what would you do in that situation. It's almost like a what if, like that people sort of sometimes propose of, like, in this situation, what would you do? And I thought, he tried to do the right thing in that, and you were kind of like behind him. I would say I was like very much behind what he was trying to do in this movie in terms of, okay, this man is innocent. No one's no one's paying attention to him. No one's like really looking at him as a suspect in this. So if he can do what he can and try to sort of sway the jury to give a not guilty verdict, then hopefully that person gets acquitted. He doesn't have that sort of no guilt on his conscience, and he can get away with it scot-free as well. In that, on that level, I was emotionally invested, and I was invested in that. But it was just about how it was playing out throughout the movie is just where it was like losing me a little bit in terms of sort of the jury deliberation. Again, I understand that you have those type of like characters in a jury. You've got 12 people that really, like, I don't want to say really don't want to be there, because like some people can't wait to do jury service and when they sort of get into the nitty-gritty of some court cases. But of course, you've got people with lives that have things going on, go in there with like their own like biases and stuff like that, and don't want to be stuck in this room for some extended periods of time. I can imagine for myself, if I was in that situation, I wouldn't want to be on the jury service at a time like that. But it was just the discussions that were happening. It just didn't grab me, and I didn't think that anything that was happening in the jury room was compelling enough for me or entertaining enough for me to sort of really have me entertained throughout the movie. Is kind of my point on it.
What about you, Daniel?
So I kind of agree that the discussion among the jury is not the strongest part, and it also doesn't take up. I think it takes up maybe half of the middle part of the movie, say, and the other part is interactions between Justin and his wife, and interactions between the two lawyers, for instance. That just not like, was that not enough to compensate for what happened in the jury room for you?
Not really. Like, even especially the stuff with like between him and his wife, I was like so uninvested in what was going on.
Too cutesy, or
in that. it just didn't land with me. I think the most compelling part between, the most compelling dynamic between the two was when she realized what had happened and she protected him, and then sort of the discussion that they had afterwards, and it was just a bit like how one bad thing then leads to sort of a few other people being corrupted by, and when I say corrupted, I mean like kind of like morally corrupted in terms of sort of the decision that they're doing, or sort of like how things play out, like one with like her wife who's meant to be like this like loving character that's like taken in a broken person and that's like helped them heal, helped them like change who they were, and is now like about to start like raise a family with them. Like you kind of like see someone like that to be pure, like and quite like an innocent, like pure kind of character, but then they've then been sort of muddled in this situation, and then they come out a little bit more morally grey in terms of sort of how they choose to sort of deal with the situation. And then likewise with the lawyer, I think sort of the whole like dynamic between like him and the lawyer towards the end of the movie, and like this kind of like, I know you did it, but obviously she can't say that he did it, and sort of for her career and for sort of what's on the line for her, she can't pursue that she can pursue that he did it, but then it's a case of sort of everything for her sort of falls apart. So again, she has to make a choice as to sort of what she wants to be, and like what type of person she wants to be, and this and the other, and what she wants for herself. Just to kind of like summarize sort of the waffle that was just on there, essentially was that for the most part, I think everything towards the end of the movie I enjoyed a lot more. Of course, like the dynamic between like the lawyers as well, I did enjoy some of their interactions as well. But everything kind of like before that, it just wasn't entertaining. I wasn't like on the edge of my seat. I wasn't sort of wanting to like see more or like know more. I was just kind of watching like, okay, this is cool, this is good, like what's happening is like interesting, but I wasn't as invested.
So there's a few different points there. I kind of agree with you that just watching them be the perfect couple is kind of boring. But then one thing this movie does is it presents you with a situation that seems very simple and very stock. Like they seem like stock characters, right? But then it keeps adding detail and you get additional background to what's happening. So at first you think they're the perfect couple. You think maybe they met in college and they got married right out of college and they have these great careers, like she's a teacher, he's a writer, and they have this nice house, and they look like a perfect family, right? And then you start adding details to it, and you realize he's a recovering alcoholic, and you can imagine, okay, maybe they weren't always so perfect. And then you realize that actually they met while he was, what's it called? He was ordered to work in the school. Teacher. As part of his sentence, right? He was essentially assigned to her, and then that's how they get to know it. Like it keeps adding detail, and things that were said earlier that seemed innocuous now suddenly seem like get additional like weight to it, right? Like that scene that you mentioned where the lawyer shows up at their house and asks Allison about the car, about the accident, right? And Allison covers for Justin and then confronts him later on. It's not just why did you lie to me? It's also, are you not who you've said you were for the past year, right? Was I wrong to trust in you and give you a second chance, right? So there are all these. I thought there's layers and edges to it that really worked, and something that starts out really one-dimensional and really, really cliche suddenly starts getting like acquiring more detail and more context, and every time the movie does that, it gets more interesting. So for instance, like their relationship starts out very basic, but by the end of it, it's quite interesting, I thought.
Yeah, I can agree with it. I can agree with it. It just wasn't like a wow factor for me.
Like if you're not into it, then you're not into it, right? Like there's no arguing that. There's just something where I said, okay, it's especially like I went into this having no expectations, right? I'd seen some blurbs about how it's really good or whatever, but I don't really trust those because those often don't have much to do with the actual movie. And so I kind of went into it thinking, okay, this is like, it looks a bit like a Hallmark movie. Like we don't get those in the UK, but like we all know the type, right? Like very polished, very safe, very inoffensive, like made for cable movies, right? And it looks a bit like one, but then it keeps going and keeps adding detail, and it gets better over time. I thought like that's like once I realized it was doing that, that's where I got interested. Oh. And then there was another point you made.
The lawyers, or
so, but what about the lawyers? because I quite like them.
I was saying I enjoy the dynamic. I enjoyed like the relationship that they had between the two of them. In terms of sort of, you know, how one, just like the banter that they had between them was like, you know, super interesting. And then you've got this sort of, you know, prosecutor who has sort of, you know, so much resources behind her, and then you've got this like kind of like legal aid, and you know, he's like kind of overworked and on this case, and he's kind of slowly helping her realize that she's made a mistake in this, and like she's actually got the wrong person, and he's like really like passionate about that. It just kind of, you know, I can imagine for like anyone that's a public defender who sort of, you know, is maybe in a similar situation, can probably like, you know, really relate well to him in this sort of, you know, in this movie essentially.
Yeah, so I really liked Faith as the district attorney. So I always like it when like everybody is like there's conflict, but everybody's well-meaning and has an understandable motive, right? So in this, there isn't really a villain. Right? Not really. In a lot of movies, the district attorney would be the bad guy, right? Who is hell-bent on convicting an innocent man for a quota, and that's what she gets accused of, right? But it's a little bit more, like there's a little bit more to her, right? She's got a lot riding. Like she seems to be a decent person, and she seems like she would do a good job in that job if she gets it. But in order to get the job, she has to win the case. And now she's all about faith in the system, right? Like even to the point where her name is Faith, right? Like that's one of the least subtle things in the movie. And so I think whenever the movie looks at things through her eyes, it's not as simple as I'm going to get this conviction no matter what. Like that's her job, and that's what she wants to do. But she and the public defender have this really professional and mutually respectful relationship, right? Where they both think they are an essential part of the system. And if they both do their job, then justice will happen. And then Faith starts losing faith in her work, right? Because she starts to believe that the man she's prosecuting is in fact innocent, but she can't be sure. So she leaves it up to the jury because that's what they're supposed to do. And then in the end, she gets a conviction. But at that point, she's pretty sure that it's the wrong person. But she, again, not to the point where she's ready to throw everything she's worked for away. Similar to what Justin is doing, right? Because he knows he has in a vacuum, he knows what the right thing to do is, but acting on that would require throwing everything he's worked for years away, right? So those two kind of parallel each other. So there's, again, stuff going on here. I really was interested in like the parallels between Faith and Justin, right? Because they kind of had the same decision to make, but in very different contexts for very different reasons. And that is ultimately what drove the movie in the last act, I thought.
I can't disagree with some of what you said there.
And going off of what you said about Justin, that actually leads to my next question. How do you feel about how the truth was slowly seeping out of him, and how that ended up resulting in him like snitching on himself, which was very I found that hilarious, but at the same time I understood it, and like it felt like I felt like pleased for him, because it kind of felt refreshing that because each time he was slowly kind of telling on himself, you could see that he felt like there was a weight that was being lifted off his shoulders each time he was helping the guy, but at his own consequence. And then he had to kind of reel it back in and cover his tracks at the same time. So just how did you feel about just that part of the film in terms of the truth actually slowly coming out of him at the expense of his own freedom?
I mean, I think going into the movie, I kind of knew that he was the person that killed the person, and he was on the jury. So in terms of the slow reveal of it sort of throughout the movie, you kind of know what to sort of expect by the time it happens. But in terms of how he reacts to it and everything that kind of comes in after that, I thought it was really well done. He in the very first moment goes to speak with the lawyer to sort of discuss the situation that he's in, to sort of get advice as to sort of what he needs to do. And then every time he's trying to solve something, it's there's a new problem being presented with it. So when he speaks to the lawyer, it's okay, you can find him innocent, but then that means that they have to then reopen the case and go and actually find sort of the person that did it. And if it's not the boyfriend, then they're going to start to look at sort of different situations that happen, and it might eventually all lead back to you again. So then he then has to hold that, and then again still proceed to try to do the right thing. And of course, sort of, when it's revealed that there's like the police officer sort of on the case as well, and then sort of he's starting to do a little bit of digging, and sort of what I actually like really liked as well about this is that to the audience it's so obvious, like we know that he's done it, it's so obvious, but in the movie and in the context of the movie, it's like no one really looks at him because it just seems like such a wild situation for the actual killer to be on the jury. So like even when the police officer like is like showing him like of all like the list of all the cars that sort of have had work done in the past, whatever, he even comes across the name, but he's like, oh, we can cross you off the list basically just because like, you know, you can say what you did, we can basically cross you off the list. Was just like super interesting. So I think it was more just like, for me, it was more his reaction to him finding out that he was actually the killer in this, and like him trying to scramble, and like it could have been like an easy like open shut case, like all 11 other jurors voted guilty in this and he was the only person that was like not guilty. And this is where I feel like the film was lacking, was because like in that situation now he has to then start to convert the other jurors and start to like not manipulate but like sort of persuade the other jurors that this person is not guilty. And I just feel like that's where most of my frustration was just like that just wasn't really done well enough for me. And then that then leads into some of the annoying characters that we had on the on the jury, especially like the coach that was just like so hell-bent on sort of making sure that the guy was guilty because of like his past and like the gang that he was associated with, and sort of all sort of the impact that it's had on sort of the kids around him and this, that, and the other. It was just like and it speaks to the theme of like change, and can people really change? And like in his eyes, he couldn't change. Like he was that person, and he will like always be that person in his eyes, and sort of he was always a bad person. So even if there was like an ounce of like doubt in his mind on like a scale of like, you know, it was like maybe like 70% he didn't do it, but 30% he did do it, he would always go with sort of that he did do it. But it's just like that, him manipulating or like trying to convince the other jury members to go not guilty was just where it just didn't flow for me really well.
So that one juror clearly represents the hardline, no second chances, people don't change kind of interpretation, right? And I think that is more like by itself, that's maybe not the most interesting stance, but I think that's in the context of everybody else's answer to that question, right? But just to get back to that aspect of what like was the realization interesting, the thing you mentioned was why Justin can't just come forward, he has to convince the other jurors to acquit, right? When I walked into this movie, I knew what it was about, right? I knew this was about a jury member who realizes he's the guilty one, right? And I think it was a good choice that this movie made that realization very sudden, right? I expected it to be like a growing suspicion over time, and then suddenly he becomes convinced of it. But it's actually very quick, right? Like he goes from having no idea to being certain, I think, in one scene, right? I think that is something when it was like date and place was mentioned. And then he realizes, oh, that's exactly when I hit the deer, but couldn't see idea. And right, it falls into place immediately. But the movie is not actually about the question of, am I guilty? It's about, given that I'm guilty, what is the right thing to do, right? He goes to his lawyer friend, who essentially says, if you do the right thing, it will ruin your life and your wife's life and your child's life. Right. And that is the cost, right? Like, I think if it was just him, he would come forward. But the fact that, so first of all, going to prison for life for an accident is already a tall ask, right? And the only reason it would be that way is because of his past, right? Because the system stands as you cannot become a better person, right? Your mistakes in the past will forever define you, right? That is why he would go to prison for life. And the second part is that it wouldn't just impact him, it would also impact his family, right? And so now it becomes about how you do the right thing without incurring that cost. And I think that is the core of the movie, and I think that is what at least got me interested.
No, I agree. Honestly, it's just the way that he was trying to maneuver his own mistake and his own truth is what, for me, grabbed me. Because it's like, bro, you're digging yourself you're digging yourself such like a big hole, but at the same time, you're shoveling back the mud into that hole. So it was just like a continuous back and forth. That was its selling point. However, I'll be honest with you, I didn't know that was going to be its selling point. I honestly thought, because I even spoke about this with Daniel. When I saw the trailer, I said to myself, the selling point is there's a mixture of many things, right? Moral dilemma, internal conflict, and the mystery about who killed the girl. Daniel was like, no, it's pretty much the story is pretty much, the gist of it is the guy, he's the killer, and now it's like if he's gonna pretty much confess, right? And what comes with that. So, do you think that should have been the selling point? As in the internal conflict and the moral dilemma and him pretty much confessing, or do you think that they should have kind of leaned more into the mystery of who done it, or do you think that they could have done both?
I think it was the right choice.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, we talked about the movie when we decided to talk about it for the channel, right? And first of all, it took me a long time to figure out what the movie was about because none of the summaries actually say what it's about, right? They just say something about a juror has to make a big decision or some nonsense, right? Like this is, again, like we've talked about this in the past, that spoiler culture has ruined everything, where people are so afraid of spoilers that they can't distinguish what is a real spoiler and what isn't. And here, Justin being the guilty one is not a spoiler, it's the premise, right? And that's why I included it in my summary at the beginning, because that is the setup. It's not a reveal in the story, right? And my big question was, okay, then why does he have to convince all of these different... So first of all, it took me about an hour to figure out what was going on because none of the summaries and descriptions and reviews actually talked about it. But the trailer makes it very clear. So I normally avoid trailers, but in this case, I watched it and there it's very clear what's going on. And then my question was, why does he have to convince all the other jurors? Do they not need to have a unanimous verdict in order to convict? And the movie addressed that actually and said, if it's not unanimous either way, there's a retrial and then they have another jury and he won't be on it, and that jury will probably convict. So that is, I think that those were the stakes at the moment. That in that jury room, he had to convince 11 other people who did not want to be there of the truth without being able to tell them the truth. And I think making that the core of the movie, I think, is what makes it. Now, I think in the details, some of these doesn't work all that well, right? Some of the positions some of the jurors take are maybe not the most interesting ones, but they're also supposed to be random people who are just there because the government told them to show up, right? Like they're meant to be average people, and so they have kind of an average person's approach to what this is. And some of them are really into it and want to do a good job, like that 4-person, right? Who really gets into it. And then you have other people who say, look, I've got 3 kids at home. I need to make this quick. And then everybody else falls somewhere on that spectrum. So while that's pretty standard for those kinds of stories, I thought it also worked.
Yeah, I agree. You know what, right? I wouldn't have complained if they made it a murder mystery too. However, the reason why is because, like I said, for me, it was just interesting because it was a mixture of many things. It was like, because I would have thought the approach would have been, okay, so this guy, like he doesn't know if he's the killer, right? So if they did fall into the whole murder mystery, he doesn't know he's the killer. So then when he's in the whole jury room and they're discussing who's guilty or not, it's like he's trying to figure out, not only is he trying to save someone who could be the killer, but at the same time, he's trying to figure out as well if he did kill them. So then it would have kind of like up the stakes a bit more, because already the stakes that, okay, if I am the killer, then I lose my freedom and my family suffer, and and also I'm giving my life up for a bad guy, well, ex-gang member or whatever, right? So it would have been a bit convoluted because it's like there's a lot of layers to it in terms of like the murder mystery, in terms of like how I've like pretty much set out. But at the same time, for me, it would have been just a bit more fun. But still, I can't complain. Because it was fun. Or like overall, it was just very interesting. And in terms of like what you were saying, Daniel, about like other people with their kids as well, and they just like the jury room in general. I personally thought the jury room was interesting. I do feel like I did have issues with some characters, like unfortunately the 2 black people there. However, I do understand why they were frustrated, and I do see how like the black guy, I think he was a coach, he kind of like represent, like you said, I don't know which one of you guys said it, but he represented like he was symbolic of pretty much you can't change, and his stance on that was like he was like he would have never changed, and that's pretty much he was that representation, right?
And I also thought he had a decent reason for doing that, because he had seen those gangs in action, and he said there's only one way you leave a gang, right? And that's as a corpse. Mm-hmm. So there is no such thing as getting better from that, right? In his opinion. I thought that made sense if that was his experience.
And
but he was also a youth coach, was he? He was like a basketball coach or something like that in this movie.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, from him, is that like in his position, what if he had a young kid that was like, you know, groomed by these gangs but was still young enough to like make a change, and he could have like made a positive impact on that person, you know, through some of his coaching and his mentoring and stuff like that. So I felt like he wasn't open or like open to that option. I like, and I completely understand why he was like depicted like that in the movie, but it's just like I feel like he could have seen change in, especially when you're working with young people. Like young people are different, come from like loads of different backgrounds, loads of different contexts as to their behaviors and this, that, and the other. And it's his job to coach people and make them the best versions of themselves. So it just he could have had a little bit more of a nuanced argument in that sense for me. But I understand it for some of the movie context as to like why he felt aggrieved by the gangs and why he felt like he couldn't change.
To me, he came across as somebody who has been trying for years and it never worked. Like once you lose somebody to the gangs, you don't get them back. I don't know. Like I know teachers, and they've talked about losing students to maybe not necessarily gangs, but just to bad influences. And you know, somebody might have the experience that like once you lose somebody, you don't get them back, right? And like I don't know what the realistic answer in that is. Like the most realistic one is you get some back and some you don't, right? My take on that was kind of that, and maybe it's not quite as black and white as he's never been able to get somebody back, but it's more like he's been fighting these guys for years and years, and he's been losing good kids to them, and so now he has a chance to get even, and so he's not interested in big debates, right? He just wants his pound of flesh, right? I think that makes sense.
Yeah, and I like, again, like I can see it from both sides in terms of like him being hardened by the role that he's doing, and him also being a little bit softer and a little bit more like nurturing from the role that he does. So again, like,
and it's ultimately one person, right?
Yeah, and just like young people can go like different ways, so can like kind of like teachers and mentors and stuff like that. You know, they again like with like life experiences in dealing with these people, it can like shape that person to be a certain way. So in this movie, he was that more hardened version of that, which is fine.
So, did the movie respond in a way that made sense in terms of realism in that type of scenario? Like, would you say it was an over exaggeration, or would you say, okay, that's pretty much how anyone would respond in that situation? And would you say it was like thought provoking for you two and made you feel like, oh, okay, I would have probably did the same thing that they done? Because if you did feel like that way, then in my opinion, that's a success. The movie did what it was supposed to do.
So the entire thing hinges on a massive coincidence, right? That he just happens to be called to jury duty in the case where he's actually the one who did it. And I think it's okay. It's okay if you start a story with a massive coincidence. You just shouldn't finish one with one. But once you're on board with the premise, it does it quite well, because it basically just explores the different answers that you could give to that question, and of what you should do and whether or not somebody deserves second chances and so on. But it doesn't really give an answer, right? It just presents you with like 8 different answers. And then you're supposed to make up your mind about which is the correct one.
In terms of like realism, the only like issue I had was with the policeman that was on the jury as well, because he goes out and does his like a bit of an investigation. He realizes he's being tailed by, what's his name again? Justin, yeah. He realizes he's being tailed by Justin. He then brings him into some of the investigation that he's doing and that he thinks is a possible hit and run. He also sees that Justin's car was fixed within that time. And then there's the whole instant of him. Obviously, he turns his back, but Justin purposely dropping the papers, and then they're in front of the judge, and then Justin kind of like throws him under the bus a little bit in front of the judge as well. So it's a bit like, as a police officer, isn't your brain starting to work to think, okay, maybe this is someone that should be paid closer attention to? But it just kind of like his character kind of concludes in him speaking to the prosecuting the lawyer, saying that you've got it all wrong. I think it's hit and run, but doesn't then raise any suspicion that it could be Justin's character in this as well. So that's the only one I was like, you've done all this good work, and you are just missing. And again, it's like the like possibility, like you said, it's one massive coincidence, like the possibility of like the killer being on the jury. Like no one would ever think of it, but it's like as a police officer, you should have like your suspicion levels should be raised a lot higher from sort of everything that unfolded.
I've also got other questions like if this is such a massive deal that it gets you kicked off the jury immediately, do they not screen for this? Like, do they not run names through databases or something? And it's because he's from a different state or whatever. Okay, fine. But he also gets he takes his badge into the jury room every day through the metal detectors. Right. Mm-hmm. There's this, and then there's also the question of like, why does he not catch on? Like, and you could say, okay, maybe it's such a big coincidence that he doesn't seriously entertain it or whatever. But the movie has weak points, and I think that whole thing is one of them. I think if you take him out, it doesn't harm the story very much. I don't think.
No, not completely. What I do think it does well is, even though the lawyers are the ones addressing the jurors and are sort of kind of like the one that they need to persuade the most in this case, it did kind of like a good job to show that the jurors are really not high on their priority or like what their main focus is in this case, because you have the prosecution, you have Faith actually go to the juror's home and doesn't even like connect the names or like the surnames with like the juror that's actually on the case, just because
they have different surnames.
Do they have different surnames?
Yeah.
Are they not married? Okay.
So that is why, right? No, they actually said his last name is Kemp, hers is Cruzen, and that is why she doesn't make the connection. They actually make they make a point of while Faith is in their home talking to Allison, like a picture of them is behind Faith. And she almost sees it, but doesn't quite, right? So, and then at a later point, she makes that connection that it's the same family, and she asks, hey, what's the husband's name? And then she just Googles what husband of Alison Cruzen, and his picture comes up, which was one of the biggest plot holes in the entire thing, or the most contrived thing. Yeah. Like, there are little details in there.
Wait, why?
Because if you just Google husband of name, you don't get 20 pictures of that person. Like, she should have gone to the Facebook profile and then seen pictures of him there, right? But they just took the shortcut of just Google husband of Alison Cruzen, and then his photo comes up. It's a bit silly, but it's not something that you couldn't also get with 2 more steps or whatever. Yeah, it's movie magic. It's okay. But yeah, there are little things in here that don't like where you kind of have to roll with it, I think. But they're not things that are really important to the story. It's like little logistics, right?
No, you completely like mute my point, but it's like good to have like the additional like context, because I completely missed that they had 2 separate surnames in this.
Mm-hmm. But the point I'm gonna say, I'm not referring to the Google search image. Speaking in general, I necessarily didn't have issues with the carelessness in this film. I didn't really see it as a plot hole, because I feel like that was a theme in terms of how careless law and justice can be. Like, it's been like that throughout, in terms of like the people that they selected for jury duty, the investigation, the way they just brushed off evidence, even the way that they just handled the whole case. So I personally thought that was like an ongoing theme that they were trying to like just build off on, and low-key I was asking myself, are they trying to like bring attention into how the justice system is? Well, maybe not consistently, but at times, I'm pretty sure at times, this is how the justice system can be unjust. So
it speaks to it definitely speaks to some of the biases. And yeah, I mean, the statistics probably show that more often than not, like, if someone's killed, it's usually by like someone that they know, or like a loved one or something like that, especially like if they're like in an abusive relationship or something like that. So like there is probably stats to back it up, but it just kind of shows like some of the biases or some of the biased thinking that people have in some of these situations as well, which makes them have that tunnel vision and maybe like puts the blinders on them so that they don't actually see the whole picture all the time, just because they're like so narrowly focused on what they expect what they expect it to be based on history. History wasn't the word I was going to say. Based on prior experience.
Yeah, it definitely does things like that, right? So they say things like it's always the spouse, or it's usually the spouse, or just look at him, he's he's guilty, something like that, right? Or this goes towards like somebody's past defining who somebody is, right? He's a former gang member, therefore he is a criminal, therefore he did it, right? And if he didn't do this, then he did something else. Either way, we're getting the right guy, right? That sort of thing. And like police kind of getting tunnel vision and kind of latching onto a theory and then just trying to prove the theory as opposed to finding the truth is a thing that happens. At the same time, the movie goes out of its way to kind of exalt the system, right? They keep talking about how important the justice system is and how important the jury system is. And Faith and Eric, the public defender, they have multiple conversations about how they're both doing their jobs, and and if we both do our jobs, then the system will generate justice, right? And we just have to have trust and faith in the system and all of that. So it actually, like, I think spends a lot of time saying that it's not about that, right? But at the same time, there's stuff like you mentioned that, like, the police is just not good at their jobs, right? And just like a retired cop can just in a weekend crack the case essentially just by trying, right? So I think it's a little bit of both.
Yeah, I mean, I think the ultimate conclusion of the movie as well was that an innocent man was sent down for a crime that he didn't commit as well. So that kind of like speaks to some of the sort of faults or some of the sort of missteps within the justice system as well.
Yeah.
How did you guys feel about the cliffhanger? Did it work?
I thought they had the perfect ending, and then more movie happened. So the perfect ending is when he's putting the child to bed, and there's police sirens and there's police cars coming towards him, and then they pass him, and he has like this silent panic attack of, what if they're coming for me? And every time he sees a police car from now on, he will have that thought. He will never have closure. That's the perfect ending. That's where you end the movie. I think so. Because
I see it.
Because like it ends the story, right? He chooses his family over justice, right? Because they voted to convict while he was in the hospital looking after Allison, right? And so he made that choice, and as a result, injustice was done, but he got his family, he got his wish, and now he's with his family and he's moving forward, but he cannot have closure, right? At any moment, the police could come and arrest him. And I think that is kind of the ambiguity on which that movie needs to end. And the actual ending of Allison showing up at the house with the implication that she's changed her mind about not seeking a different conviction, I don't think is that compelling. Like especially since if she did that, she wouldn't show up with them. She would just file the paperwork and the police would come, right?
Yeah.
Like she would just charge them. So her showing up at that house doesn't really work on that level, but I'm not sure why else she would there, other than to say, I know you did it, I'm not going to prosecute you because I see your point of view. I think that's a weaker ending.
I actually have two things to say to that. The first thing is, when I first saw the ending, I actually liked the ending. I enjoyed it because it was pretty much telling me that the truth will always come out. And that was the sad truth to the truth. It's always going to come out. However, now that you said what you just said, that would have actually been even more exciting, because it's like, like constant, you're pretty much living in mental prison, because each time police comes, you don't know if your time is then, if that makes sense, if your time is, you know what I'm saying? So also, the prosecutor, Allison, is that her name?
Faith. Allison's the wife.
Faith, her presence would have always been there, would have always been looming. So it's like, you don't know, I'm sure there would have been a time where I'm sure, like I said, the truth always reveals itself. It's always like that in history, right? Even like freaking now, the rapper Tupac, his killer has been revealed just a year ago, 2 years ago, and that murder happened, I don't know how many years ago, 30 years. So it's always gonna be there. So I think at the back of the audience's mind that, okay, each time, you just don't know when the truth is gonna come out, but you know that the truth is gonna come out. And with obviously Faye's presence, knowing that Faye's presence there, and she knows that he killed him, it just would have added to that. So I think that would have been a great ending, that now that you say that. But personally, I don't have an issue with the way that it ended, because that, like I said, that's the sad truth to the truth. It will always be revealed.
So how do you interpret it? Do you think she came to tell him that, she came to tell him something, right? What do you think it was?
The eyes told me that she's taking him in. I do agree, she should have probably put the police, that is an inconsistency. Is that, okay, well, if you were bringing him in, then you probably should have just, But at the same time, I think the reason why, I think she had kind of she sympathized with him, because obviously she already met his wife, Allison. So it's I don't think she wanted to do that in front of the wife and the kids. The eyes were telling me, is listen, it's time to go down to the station. It's time for you to actually tell the truth and confess. That's what that was telling me.
It's possible, yeah.
I don't know. I didn't get that when I was watching the movie. Maybe I was a little bit tired towards the end of it, but I just kind of saw it as like she just. I mean, thinking about it, it doesn't make sense for her to just like go and speak to him about it again because they already had like a whole conversation about it. I just kind of saw it as like at the time, is that he was like the only person that she could speak to about like what really happened. And I don't know. And thinking about it, that really doesn't make sense as to like why she would even like go out of her way to go and speak to him again, or even like bring up what happened again. So yeah, I do see it from you guys' perspective in that sense.
You can come up with something like, I'm going to charge you, but I'm going to give you 24 hours to turn yourself in so you can do it with dignity. Whatever. Like, possible. Question just doesn't make a good ending, and I'm not so sure.
Makes for a good sequel. Turn it to an action movie. He's on the run with his family. Full-on action movie. He's doing shootouts with the police. Actually, that is a question. Like, if they did a sequel or maybe a second movie in this vein, what like how could you see the story continuing?
That kid kills somebody in primary school, and then Faith gets assigned to solve the case. Faith's child gets assigned, like forward like 10 years or something, and Faith now has a child as well, and then the child has to solve the murder, and Justin's and Allison's child is the one who did it.
It could be a thing where Faith ends up being Justin's prosecutor. I mean, representative.
Or that?
Yeah, because yeah. But okay.
Maybe in 20 years, someone discovers this movie, sees it was a great movie, and wants to bring it to a new audience and does something wacky with it. Who knows?
But so is this an original IP?
This is just a story.
So this is what I'm finding. I want to understand why they haven't marketed this film, because it is a solid original movie. To me, that's showing me, okay, like we've kind of gone past the stage of kind of like, putting in our money and taking risks when it comes to original movies. Now we're just pretty much putting in our money and just like going for the movies that already have a successful IP. Have we passed that era of original movies?
I mean, it's not getting a wide release, right? It's getting a limited release, and I think it's doing better in Europe than it is in the US. I've seen some theories about how there's supposedly some kind of vendetta between the studio and Eastwood, and so they kind of want to undermine his last movie or whatever. I've also seen other ideas that this is just not the kind of movie that makes a lot of money at the theaters, and this is the kind of movie that does well on streaming and nowhere else. I think that last one, is the most likely idea. This seems to be doing all right. But even with a full release, I'm not sure it would have made all that much money. I don't know. Like, this is not the kind of movie that a lot of people show up for. And the reason I wanted to talk about it is because I think it's just a really solid movie, and just on the basis of here's a story to enjoy, I think it just works. It's a really good one. But not many people will go I'm not sure I really wanted to pay £16 for like a movie ticket for this. I would have really enjoyed this had I found this one afternoon on Prime or something, right, or on Netflix. And that is kind of the big question of like, where do these small movies belong now?
You think it like star power?
Well, I mean, like Clint Eastwood is a big name. Nicholas Holt is a fairly well-known name. So is Toni Collette. Kiefer Sutherland is a big name. J.K. Simmons is big. Leslie Bibb is big, right? So there are known names with this, but it's not like the kind of movie that a lot of people show up for, right? Like, that's why Joker is Joker, right? Because it's not just a Taxi Driver ripoff. It like the reason it made money and it got people talking about it is because it had the name Joker on it, right? And like, that is just the reality that most people don't show up for just stories, right? It has to be franchises. It has to be something they know, right? And I can't really blame them for not taking a huge risk on like an original story that has no franchise potential, has no, like, we joke about sequels, but it doesn't have sequel potential, right? This cannot be a long-running series, right? It's just a story. And I like that, and I'll go to the cinema for that. And failing that, I'll watch it on streaming and enjoy it and recommend it. But we talked about the Iron Claw, right? And we saw that in cinemas, but I'm not sure I had to see that in cinemas. As much as I like the cinema, I don't like. There are movies that really benefit from that, and movies where it's not. It's kind of optional. And I know that now that's kind of heresy for like a movie podcast to talk about, let's just watch it on streamer. But like for something that's not very visual, it's kind of true. I don't know. Like, I don't know what the best solution for this is. I think this movie deserves to be watched for anybody who's interested in the story. I'm not sure that a theatrical release is the best strategy for it. I'm not sure.
What was the point though? Because he spent 35 million on this film. So it's like a 35 million film with a limited release doesn't really make sense. You might as well just go all out.
To be fair, it's not the most expensive movie that would have been made to go straight to streaming. I'm sure there's like a lot of movies that are like bigger budgets than that. And that went direct to streaming. I mean, at least this one had some chance of like recouping some money on its theatrical release before sort of being on streaming, to be honest.
So that's what they're trying to do now, recoup some money. I didn't know that's how the business works.
So having any kind of theatrical release makes you eligible for awards. So that's one aspect of it, right? Like by having this in at least some cinemas, this can win Oscars or whatever else, right? Whether it will or not, it's a different story, but it's now eligible. If you're only on streaming, you're not eligible.
Yeah.
That's one aspect of it. The other one is that Clint Eastwood insisted, right? Because it's the last movie of his career and he wants it to be in cinemas. And like a lot of actors, directors, and so on just want it to be in cinemas. Like there was this whole thing, like I don't remember who it was, like that some fairly big director had a big fight with Netflix recently about it. I think there's a few. And ultimately, like they basically say it's a proper movie, therefore I want to watch it in cinemas. And I'm not that much of a purist about it. I think whatever gets people, whatever makes it available to people and makes this economically viable so that more stuff like this gets made. That's ultimately what I care about. If cinematic release is the right answer for that, then I'm for that. If streaming is the right answer for that, I'm for that.
I think I'm referring to with Knives Out.
Possible, yeah. Also, Greta Gerwig, like, is making some Narnia movies for Netflix, and after she signed the deal, like, she made a big stink about how Netflix wants it to be on Netflix only. They're negotiating some kind of limited release now. Like, there's been a few. I think a lot of this is kind of ideology in the sense of I want this to be in cinemas. And some of this is also, if you're a filmmaker, you want this to be economical, right? So that you can make it your living and you can keep doing this, right? And I think streaming specifically has not really been figured out in terms of what is economical and how much our movies are worth and so on. And a lot of the time they do make more money if you put it like into cinemas, but then you have to advertise and that's additional cost that creates additional risk. So I'm not sure it's that simple, but I don't know, like I'm open-minded about this.
Yeah, I just find it strange. I get 35 million is not a lot, but still you invest that much money in a film.
Like if Netflix pays 50 million for this, that's a profit. Like depending on how much they spent on marketing it.
Yeah, but Netflix. Well, you've even mentioned this. Netflix's aim is just kind of like build up on their portfolio. So yeah. I understand why Netflix will make a $50 million film.
No, like if Netflix pays 50 million for this movie.
They're not going to pay 50 million. And that's pretty much like the reason why I asked this question, because I'm like, I don't think a production like a stream, like if they're recouping their money by sending it to a streaming service, then cool. But I don't think a streaming service is going to actually pay 30 million for this movie.
I think they might. Like, they have to pay more than 35, right? Because that was the production cost, right?
But it couldn't even attract the audience, though. It couldn't even attract the audience in cinema. So why would they go out their way to buy a movie that, didn't do great in the box office sales, even though it had limited release?
But the viewership is very different, right? Like the effort of watching this on Netflix when you already pay for a subscription is a lot less than buying a ticket, going to the cinema, making time for 5 hours, whatever, right? In terms of getting this seen by people, Netflix might be the dominant strategy. But then you're passing up the box office, which for this kind of movie tends to be not very high. Right? Because I don't know, like in the 20 years ago, 30 years ago, people did go to the cinema to see movies like this, and today they kind of don't. Like so far, it's made 5 million.
Yeah, that's a shame. Then people can't be complaining that there's not good movies out there because like there's movies like this, and you guys are not watching it. So it's like So we're just gonna continue getting used to like repurposed films, which don't really have a good story behind it, just nice visual effects.
So like the complaints go both ways, right? Like one complaint is movies are trash, and so it's not worth going to, like, taking a chance on some unknown movie, so that I'm just going to go to the sequel of the movie I liked. And in the other direction, the complaint is that people just don't show up for original movies, right? So if you make one, people don't come. And I think both are a little bit true. And I think just if we can just, when we find a good movie, I think recommending it and making other people aware of it, I think is a big part of the solution, I think. Like, there are a lot of bad movies out there that I don't want to buy a movie ticket for, but I want to find the good movies, right? And I can't see all movies. There's a sorting mechanisms through reviews and word of mouth and stuff like that, right? And I might not have seen this movie had it not been for this channel, right? But I'm glad I saw it. And maybe I would have seen it on Prime in 6 months or something. And then I would have liked it. And I would have said, hey, maybe I should have seen it in cinemas had I known about it or something.
I think we might be at a destination where we need to start speaking about our sports.
It's a good movie. It's a good movie with a lot of really good themes, a lot of really good moral dilemmas, and poses a lot of good questions that you're able to ponder on after watching the movie. Overall, it just lacked some of the entertainment factor for me, but that doesn't take away from kind of what we were presented with in the story and how it unfolds in this, that, and the other. It's all still pretty solid and a very good viewing. So I would give it a 7 out of 10.
Me, I enjoyed this movie, and I'm glad that it was like, when I found out, like, because I thought it may be like based off like a novel or something. So I'm glad that it's actually an original movie, and it was a good original movie. And I'm gonna be, whenever there's original movies coming out, and of course it has to have like a good synopsis or a trailer, I'm definitely gonna go check out. But I will make an effort to go and check out the type of movies I wouldn't go out my way to go and see. But in terms of this movie, it was great. It was great. It was great. I enjoyed it. Themes were executed perfectly in terms of truth will set you free, but at the same time, the truth will always come out. So I would give this film a 7 out of 10.
So for me, this is just a really enjoyable story, well crafted. It's about something. It asks interesting questions. It explores those questions through characters that, on balance, I like. And I like seeing go through those journeys. I think it deserves a watch. And so on that basis, it's a 5 out of 7.
Well, guys, thank you very much for tuning into today's discussion. Yeah, guys, thank you for tuning in today, Hervé.
Thank you for the first 100 subscribers. Again, on to the next 100. Let us know your thoughts down below on the movie. What was your thoughts on some of the topics that were discussed, some of the themes in this about morality? Do you believe people can change? What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comment section down below. And of course, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
All right, guys, thank you very much. And we will catch you next week. Au revoir.
Adios.
Bye-bye.